Every morning she walked past the same streetlights, the same cafes, and the same strangers, smiling as if nothing could touch her. Her smile was perfect, too perfect. It hid the cracks no one dared ask about. It hid the nights she spent crying into a thin pillow. It hid the emptiness of a life she did not choose. If you are hearing this story, stay until the end and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that behind every smile there can be a story worth understanding. Clara had a job at the corner bookstore, a small space filled with the smell of old paper and polished wood. People adored her. She laughed at jokes she did not always understand and helped customers find the books they did not always know they wanted. Her smile had become her currency, and she spent it freely, even when her heart felt bankrupt. The truth was, Clara's life had never been simple. After her parents' sudden death, she had been left with an inheritance she did not want and bills she could not pay. She lived in a small studio apartment above a bakery, one she could barely afford. Every month she paid rent with a mixture of pride and desperation, refusing help from anyone. She had learned early that help came at a price, and she did not trust anyone to offer it without wanting something in return. That was until he appeared. Ethan had noticed Clara the moment she walked into the bookstore one rainy afternoon. Her umbrella had flipped inside out, and she had slipped in the puddles outside. But the moment she had stepped inside, the world seemed to pause. Her smile, polite and perfect, had been her shield, but he had seen the subtle tremor of her hands, the slight quiver in her eyes. Ethan was different. He was quiet, observant, and patient. He came every day, bought the same books, and exchanged the same words with her. At first, Clara treated him as she did everyone else, with her smile and politeness, keeping the real her locked away. But Ethan did not go away. He lingered gently, carefully, until one day he slipped a small envelope into her bag as she rang up his purchase. "You dropped this," he said softly, walking toward the door before she could protest. Clara had stared at the envelope all the way home. Inside was enough money to cover her rent for 3 months, without explanation, without obligation, without even a signature. Her pride had fought against it. She had wanted to refuse, but something in Ethan's quiet insistence made it impossible. From that day on, a strange relationship began. Clara accepted his help discreetly, and they met at the bookstore, sometimes for a book recommendation, sometimes to simply talk. She discovered that he was patient, that he listened, and that he did not need her to smile all the time. And she discovered that she could trust him with small pieces of herself without fearing judgment. But Clara's life had secrets deeper than unpaid rent, secrets she had hidden not just from strangers, but from everyone, including herself. Her parents had left her something extraordinary, something that could have changed her life entirely. They had left her a mansion, a fortune, a legacy of wealth she had never wanted. She had refused lawyers and trustees, choosing to live small, choosing to live quietly. But the inheritance had a name, and it was tied to hers. Ethan did not know this. For weeks he watched Clara with careful attention, noticing the faint tension beneath her smiles, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was looking. He could not understand why someone so radiant could seem so burdened. He wanted to help, to protect, and eventually he wanted to love her, but he respected her boundaries. Clara, for her part, began to feel something she had not felt in years. Someone cared, truly cared, without expectation or judgment. Her heart began to thaw, and with it, the smile she sold became slightly less perfect, slightly more honest. One evening after a long day of work, Clara and Ethan walked together to a small cafe near her apartment. Rain pattered on the windows. Inside, the warmth of candlelight and coffee filled the room. "You do not have to keep hiding behind that smile," Ethan said gently, watching her stir her drink. "I can see it, the real you." Clara laughed softly, a sound heavy with disbelief. "You think you can see me?" Everyone sees what they want to see. I see more, he said quietly. I see the tiredness. I see the hope. I see everything you try to hide. For the first time in a long time, Clara did not respond with her practiced smile. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet safe. The weeks passed. The money Ethan gave helped her, yes, but it was more than that. It was freedom. Freedom to breathe. Freedom to consider possibilities. Freedom to allow herself to trust. But the inheritance had not gone away. Clara had thought it would. Thought that if she ignored the letters, the calls, the legal reminders, it would vanish. She had underestimated its persistence. One day, a lawyer appeared at the bookstore, carrying a thick envelope and a polite but insistent demeanor. "Clara Bennett?" he asked. She nodded, heart tightening. "You are being contacted regarding your inheritance. Your parents left you a considerable estate, and it is your legal right to claim it." Clara's hands trembled slightly. She forced her usual polite smile. "I am not interested," she said firmly. The lawyer's brow furrowed. "It is important you understand the implications. Refusing or ignoring it could complicate matters later." Clara nodded again, accepting the envelope, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the past she had tried to bury forced its way back. That night she sat in her small apartment, the envelope unopened on the table. The weight of her parents' decisions, her own choices, and Ethan's quiet concern pressed down on her chest. She had hidden so much behind her smile that it felt almost impossible to live honestly. Ethan came by that evening, knocking lightly on her door. She let him in, grateful for his presence, grateful for his normalcy. "You seem distant," he said quietly. Clara laughed softly. "I have things to deal with. Family matters, complications." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. "Whatever it is, you do not have to face it alone. Not with me." Her heart ached with the weight of truth she had not yet shared. She knew that someday she would have to reveal everything, including the inheritance she had refused, the life she had hidden, and the fears that had kept her smiling every day. And when that day came, she feared she might lose Ethan, the one person who had seen beyond the smile and stayed. Clara could not sleep that night. The envelope lay on the table, unopened, but it called to her with a weight she could not ignore. She had spent years running from her parents' legacy, pretending it did not exist, convincing herself that simplicity was freedom. But freedom had a price. She now realized that the cost of hiding had left her lonely, tired, and burdened in ways no one could see. Ethan came by the next evening as he often did. Clara opened the door, trying to maintain her usual polite smile, but this time it faltered. "You look tired," Ethan said softly, stepping inside. He placed a small paper bag on the counter. "I thought you might like some dinner. No questions, no obligations." Clara smiled weakly, taking the bag. "Thank you." Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Clara," he said gently, "you do not have to pretend. Not with me. I can see you. I know there is more behind that smile." Clara's eyes filled with tears she did not want him to see. "You do not understand," she whispered. "There are things I cannot share, things I have hidden for years." Ethan reached for her hand, holding it with quiet reassurance. "Try me," he said. "I am here." Clara wanted to. She wanted to tell him everything, but fear held her back. Fear that if he knew the truth, if he discovered the inheritance she had refused, he might see her differently, that the fragile trust they had built would shatter. Days passed. Clara tried to live normally, smiling at customers, laughing lightly at jokes, and avoiding the envelope that threatened to expose her secret. But secrets, she knew, had a way of unraveling. It happened unexpectedly. One evening, Ethan accompanied Clara home after work. As they passed the bakery beneath her apartment, a man stepped out from the shadows holding papers. "Clara Bennett?" the man asked, voice firm. Clara froze. This is regarding your inheritance, he continued. Your parents left you a considerable estate, and legal matters require your signature. You cannot ignore this. Clara's hands tightened around her bag. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but now it was here, undeniable. Ethan stepped beside her. Clara, he said softly. She looked at him, searching his face for judgment, for disappointment, and found none. Only concern, only patience. I did not want this, she admitted. I wanted to live simply. I wanted to keep my life small. But it seems the world does not allow that. Ethan nodded. You do not have to face it alone. Whatever choice you make, I will support you. Clara swallowed, her heart heavy. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry openly, leaning into Ethan's presence. The following days were tense. Clara met with lawyers, discussed terms she had avoided for so long, and faced the reality of her inheritance. The mansion, the fortune, the legacy. It was hers, whether she wanted it or not. Ethan remained by her side, quietly supportive. He never pressured her, never judged her, but he could see the internal struggle, the conflict between the woman she wanted to be and the life that had been chosen for her. One evening, Clara invited Ethan to her small apartment. The envelope lay on the table, open but untouched. I have to decide, she said, voice trembling. I cannot hide anymore. Not from the world. And not from myself. Ethan nodded. Whatever you decide, it will be the right choice if it comes from you. Clara took a deep breath. I sold my smile for years, Ethan. I hid my pain behind it. But you saw through it. You made me feel safe. And I am terrified that if you know everything, you will regret it. Ethan smiled softly, lifting her hand. You are not defined by secrets, Clara. You are not defined by fear. I care about you for who you are, not for what you hide. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of relief. She realized that she had been carrying a burden far heavier than money, far heavier than loneliness. She had been carrying the fear of being misunderstood. I have to accept it, she whispered, the inheritance, the responsibility. But I also want to keep my life with some simplicity. I do not want it to consume me. Ethan nodded. We will figure it out together. You do not have to face it alone. Days later, Clara visited the mansion for the first time. It was beautiful, expansive, and overwhelming. The rooms were filled with furniture she did not recognize, walls that held stories she had never lived, and windows that overlooked gardens she had only dreamed of. But the emptiness of the space reminded her why she had avoided it for so long. Wealth, she realized, was only valuable if it brought happiness, not fear. She walked through the halls, running her hands along polished wood, until she found a room filled with letters from her parents. Each letter was a message, a memory, a reminder that they had loved her deeply and had tried to prepare her for the life she had inherited. Clara sat on the floor, reading each one, letting the words sink in. She realized that her parents had never wanted her to struggle or hide, but had wanted her to live boldly, fearlessly, and with honesty. When she returned home that evening, Ethan was waiting. She told him everything, the letters, the mansion, her fears, and the reason she had sold her smile for so long. He listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, he took her hands in his. You are incredible, Clara, he said, not because of what you inherited, but because of the strength it took to survive, to keep going, and to let yourself feel again. For the first time in years, Clara smiled without effort, without hiding, without selling it to the world. It was hers fully, and it felt like freedom. In the weeks that followed, she began to integrate her life. She accepted her inheritance, but she did so on her terms. She restored the mansion slowly, filled it with warmth and memories, and created spaces where she could breathe. She continued working at the bookstore, not because she needed to, but because it made her happy. Ethan remained her constant companion, supporting her, loving her, and encouraging her to embrace both her past and her future. Their bond grew stronger, forged not by wealth, but by trust, patience, and honesty. One evening, standing on the balcony of the mansion, watching the sun set over the gardens, Clara turned to Ethan. "I was afraid of everything I inherited," she admitted, "but I was even more afraid of losing myself." Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You never lost yourself. You just needed someone to remind you who you were." Clara laughed softly, the sound light and free, a sound she had not made in years. "And I almost forgot," she said, "almost forgot that happiness can be simple, even when life is complicated." They stood together in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that the past had shaped them, but it did not have to define them. The smile Clara had sold for so long had become genuine, radiant, and unafraid. And for the first time, she realized that she did not need to hide. If this story inspired you, reminded you that vulnerability can be strength, or showed the power of trust and patience, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes a smile hides more than we know, and the right person can help us find ourselves again.